Welcome to HBTV. I'm Harry Binswanger, the HB in HBTV, and today we're doing Ask Harry Anything. There's a minimum now of 20 pounds, which is about $25, on the questions that are guaranteed to be answered. But we're going to start from some that are older than that rule and take them up. And the first one I have is, did Galt use induction to persuade each striker? Now, this is a reference, for those of you who don't know the book, a reference to Atlas Shrugged and the hero of Atlas Shrugged. And induction is one of the two forms of inference: deductive inference, which applies a general principle or general truth to relatively individual or totally individual circumstances or concretes. Subjective would be the right word to use there. And induction is the process of getting a generalization to use in a deduction. Induction is the more basic process, and I would like to say a little bit about induction before I turn to the subject of the story of Atlas Shrugged. Induction was the only major philosophic topic that Ayn Rand did not develop a theory of. Fortunately, after her death, her best student and intellectual heir, Leonard Peikoff, did develop that theory, and I think it's absolutely correct theory. The question that is known as the problem of induction is, how do you validate inductions? How do you validate the whole process of induction? It seems that we rely upon the law of causality to make an induction, such as you put a pot of water on the stove and heat it to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, 100 degrees centigrade, Celsius, they now call it. It's going to boil. But how do we know that the law of causality is going to hold in the future? That itself is an induction, isn't it? And Leonard Peikoff solved the problem by, I'm just going to show you his approach to the problem. First of all, starting at the beginning, which I don't think any philosopher had ever done before. Objectivism holds that knowledge is hierarchical. And if you're talking about an induction, you start with the first hierarchically basic inductions. And they aren't things like water boils at 212 degrees in a pot on the stove. They aren't anything about water boiling or temperature. Temperature is a very sophisticated concept that really only got pinned down, I think, in the 1700s. Certainly was not known to the ancient Greeks. So that's a fairly sophisticated piece of scientific knowledge. The first inductions are things like, if I push a ball, it moves. I wouldn't even say it rolls. That is a later induction, but if I push a rock, if I push a little thing, it moves. If it's not real heavy, if it's not nailed down or glued down or fixed down, if it's free to move, it will move. I can exert a moving force on things, is one of the first inductions. When I'm hungry and eat, I feel good, and the hunger goes away. Those would be, that would be another first level induction. When the wind blows, the tree branches move, be another induction, first level. Doesn't presuppose any other inductions. Now, those inductions are infallible. They are infallible. They are self-evident. The child doesn't have to go through any process other than naming the concepts involved. And that's the other part of Dr. Peikoff's theory of induction. Concepts contain generality by their nature. Concepts are already quasi-induction. When you say table, you mean all tables. When you say wind, you have gotten the idea of all wind. When you say food, you have gotten the idea of all food. Each of these terms that are being applied is a concept, which is stands for an unlimited number of concrete things of a certain kind that you have recognized, that you have formed from perceptual observation, and which cannot be mistaken. It isn't like we could say, for instance, oh, there isn't really any such thing as food. That was a big mistake. That was like phlogiston, you know, the substance they thought that flowed between a hot body and a cold body. That was like cold fusion. There isn't any food. No, that was a big mistake. Or things don't move. We thought they did, but on closer examination, examination, is that not a movement of thought? Well, yeah. Or what was the other one that I had? I had the wind blows the tree. Well, anyway, the concepts involved, the simple, infallible concepts that are formed from the first level of observation before any earlier concepts, or from low enough down that they cannot be mistaken, because some of them are technically not first level concepts. Like blows is not, or moves, it's not a first level concept, but it's infallible. Those can be used to form a general statement based upon perception that cannot be mistaken. So you have to ground the whole thing in effect, axiomatically true, but that's not quite the right word to use for it. Self-evidently true, infallible, inerrant statements of what is directly perceived. Let me start a little left parenthesis here. I said moves is not a first level concept. The observation of motion is self-evident. You don't figure out that things move. You observe it. It's first level in the sense that you cannot begin by forming as your first concept or as even your 20th concept moves. You have to first conceptualize some of the things that you see moving. So you have a basis for forming a concept of an action of an entity. Moves doesn't occur as apart from an entity. So you have to have the entity concept to separate out its action from it. But in the required sense, epistemologically, it is first level and it cannot be mistaken. Now, even if the child is mistaken in an application of a generalization, the generalization remains true. The deduction may be misapplied. So, for instance, he could pick up a wax apple, bite into it, thinking it's food, and it isn't food. And it does not nourish him. It does not make his hunger go away. It is not good, doesn't feel right. So that's not a problem with food makes me feel better. Food takes away the hunger. Even food nourishes me is too sophisticated for the first time. We're talking about a child of about 1.5, 2. So he can misapply it, sure. And he can think that the wax apple is an apple, so misapply the term apple. Or there could be something in special circumstances, like he could be sick and food might not be good when he's sick. That doesn't countervene the truth of his original statement. Food is good, meaning it makes me feel good, it gives me pleasure, because you can add in any qualification you want thereafter without changing the recognition of the true fact you did know. You're simply circumscribing it more by adding interfering factors. What do I mean by that? Food is good unless I'm sick. So-and-so happens unless something interferes is perfectly compatible with so-and-so happens as an induction. This also is a breakthrough idea. That is really in Ayn Rand. It's that knowledge is contextual and interfering factors added on do not undermine the validity of your original knowledge. So Einstein did not refute Newton. It's not that Newton's identifications are false. It's that they hold only for low speeds. And similarly, quantum doesn't refute the macroscopic observation. Quantum holds for the very, very small. So contextual knowledge, the generalizing power of concepts, and the hierarchy of inductions is the basis of induction. Now, that's a long digression on one of the, I don't know, top 4 problems in philosophy throughout history. But I just want to indicate that since the question refers to induction, what it is we're talking about and how sensational the objectivist philosophy is to have come up with this solution. Well, technically, let me take that. Dr. Peikoff says his theory is not part of the philosophy of Ayn Rand, which is what objectivism is. He based it on her theory of concepts, and he thinks she would would have agreed with it, but technically it can't be part of something she knew nothing of. Objectivism is her philosophy. So it's, I've toyed with calling it Randian for things that are inspired by or based upon or claim to be Ayn Rand's philosophy, but we have to be very, very careful and not say it is part of Ayn Rand's philosophy. Only what she wrote or endorsed by others is part of her philosophy. So now let's get to Atlas Shrugged. Let's get to the dessert. Elsewhere on my membership site, the author of this question explained it further. And what he is saying is, what is it that Galt said to the people he led out on strike to convince them that they should do that? And the first thing I said in answer on my own site was Atlas Shrugged was more generous with real, consistent heroes than God was. And that's what Ayn Rand said jokingly, because she was an atheist, as I am. God was more generous. She was more generous to the world of Atlas Shrugged than God was to the real world. She populated it with many heroes in Atlas Shrugged. And in reality, someone like Bill Gates or Elon Musk or Warren Buffett would not be one of the heroes of Atlas Shrugged. They're great in their work. I guess they're mixed, but they're damn good in their work. And then outside of the work, they're not. Buffett is a socialist, sort of, and maybe not socialist, but heading in that direction. Elon Musk has all kinds of strange ideas. Bill Gates is an altruist. So they would not be anybody Galt could reach. Galt wouldn't be able to explain to them. And in the novel, Dagny, the heroine, asks Galt the question of exactly this: what did you tell them to make them abandon everything? And do you recall what Galt says if you've read the novel? He says, I told them that they were right. I gave them the pride they did not know they had. I gave them the words to identify it. I gave them that priceless possession which they had missed, had longed for, had not known that yet had not known they needed a moral sanction. So it wasn't some method, induction, deduction, some combination of both that Galt particularly used. He's actually doing more deduction. He's appealing to the inductions they have already reached, at least almost reached. You see what happens to Reardon in the novel, where he grasps the sanction of the victim. He grasps that inductively. So you can help someone along with an induction, particularly by telling him where he will end up. But he has to perform the process himself in a deep induction, not wind blows the tree branches, but something like to sanction your own destroyers is to aid and abet your destruction. That is a very, very high level of abstraction. It seems simple, but who thinks in those terms? You have to know to use those concepts. So the deduction is your moral code is required to live. Their moral code is against yours. Therefore, your moral code is against what life requires. And then a further deduction, a chain of them. Any moral code that is against what life requires is anti-life. Their moral code is against what life requires. Therefore, their moral code is anti-life. Now, I was here explaining the reasoning that Francisco, another hero of the book, gives to Reardon. Your own moral code, he says, the one you lived by but never stated, acknowledged, or defended, was the code that preserves man's existence. If you were punished for it, what was the nature of those who punished you? Yours was the code of life. What then is theirs? It's an anti-life code, a code of death. I think that's probably enough on that. So there are a number of false assumptions in that question. And it really has to do, the answer to how is he able to reach them really has to do with the fact that they were already on Galt's side in their soul. And all they needed was the sanction and the words to help them to pin down what they had already sensed. Okay, let's go to, this is a very interesting one. Is it moral for a person who witnessed a murder to kill the murderer, who witnessed it himself, if there is no legal recourse available, no objective evidence, only the witness's word, and that doesn't carry the day, we assume. Consider that the victim was a loved one, and he, the man who might murder the murderer, I shouldn't say murder, kill the murderer, is willing to accept the consequences. Well, what does that mean? It should mean if he gets caught, he will not resent the fact that he is sent to jail. Now, behind this is a number of things on different levels. So you got the question, I see my wife killed by someone. I see it at close range. I can't do anything about it. Maybe I tried, doesn't matter. but I see it. I know it was a person I know very well. I see him do it. I testify in court. The man is arrested, the murderer, but the jury votes to let him free. They don't believe me, and maybe they have good reason not to believe me. There could be some, problem with it, with them believing me. Like maybe I'd been drinking, or maybe they knew I hated this guy, which I probably would have already hated him. You can make up the story, but he's freed. He's not convicted. Okay, so now, would it be moral for me to privately, extra legally, on my own as vengeance, to kill the murderer of my wife? There's several layers here, as they say. Politically, the government has to act on its context of knowledge. Everybody has to act on his context of knowledge. Your context, well, it's me in an example. My context of knowledge is this guy deserves to die. Bystanders, third parties' context, the ones who weren't there, may well be that guy should be free. He's innocent. There's no convincing evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. So their context is they can't read my mind. The jury didn't believe my testimony. He's innocent in the eyes of the law. And that's a good phrase, in the eyes of the law. I, as the person who lost his wife to this guy, have to understand that we don't live in an anarchist, constant civil war, that I live and everyone else lives in a society where these things are settled in court, not by blood feuds. And let's say I do. And for that reason, I'm, as he says, willing to accept the consequences, meaning I know that if I'm caught, other people will be perfectly within their rights to put me in prison, or maybe I would get the death sentence, depending upon what the legal situation is. I don't care. I'm willing to do it. Deeper level. Morality is deeper than politics. Do I have the moral right? And that's what the question was asked as. Yes. Why? Because the value of extreme personal justice, the justice in the extreme case, is much deeper and bigger than the value of legal objectivity. You're not actually that you pose no threat to the third parties. They don't know it, and you wish they did. But if it's so important to you that this man die, it is moral for you to do it. However, there's a third level. Why are you so desirous of this man dying? Why are you willing to accept the consequences? Why do you say, this is a more important thing to me, not that my wife be saved, not that I honor her memory, but that the killer be killed? Why is that such an important issue to you? It sounds like vengeance, and vengeance meaning a personal involvement beyond the facts of the case. I mean, the man who killed her is a disgusting animal, evil. But what do you really accomplish by doing evil? Okay, let's make up something. I'm sorry, killing the evil guy. Why should it be that important to you? It doesn't sound right. But we could make it right. Since we're writing the story here,
let's say if the person lives, it will be a threat to his daughter. He knows for almost certain that the guy who killed his wife intends to kill his daughter and has said, sooner or later, I'll get her. He can't prove it to anybody. His daughter is the only family member he's got now. That could give him a reason to be concerned. Still, it wouldn't be like, oh, I've got to get back at this guy. Now, there's nothing wrong with a healthy desire for justice. I'm glad, he thinks, to see this guy get put away. He deserves it. But if someone doesn't get what he deserves, that's not the end. You shouldn't be willing to die for that. But to say, I would accept or life in prison. Maybe he would accept life in prison to save his wife's life, and we'll write that scenario, but not just to see that the evildoer gets punished. Evil is not that important. So now let's say he has to save his wife's life by killing the guy he sees is attacking her, but no one's going to believe him. No one, this is a universally beloved figure like Ellsworth Toohey was in The Fountainhead, almost universally loved figure. Revered by the public, and you are looked down upon because you're different, you have improved yourself or something. You could write the story. And he's now faced with the choice of, I know I'll never be able to prove it, but I'm willing to go to life in prison for killing this guy if it's necessary to save my life. That's my wife's life. That's another thing that would not be psychologically questionable. That would be highly upstanding, heroic. So you see, it all depends upon the particular circumstances that you're putting into the story. But I am not among those who say, well, if you reject anarchism and realize there are these people, they say, if you reject anarchism because you realize that you've got to be objective towards other people, that trumps everything. No, it doesn't. It does not. It does not trump your life. You don't have to die for that. And it does not trump the wife's life, and it may not trump your desire for justice. Ayn Rand reported that when, as a young teenager, I think she read what's the one with Chateau d'If, the French novel, classic one. I'm just blacking out on the guy who's imprisoned in the Chateau d'If and escapes and makes it his life's work to track down the killers of something, of the people who put him there, I think it was. That's what it was. I didn't read the whole thing. I wasn't that excited by it, but I have friends who think it's great. Ayn Rand got to the end of it where it was revealed why he had done, and why he'd spent his life tracking down each of, I don't know, 5 or 6 men and killing him for putting him in this terrible prison where he was for 10 years or so. And it was just for vengeance. And she was very disappointed and very much against that novel. I keep thinking Man in the Iron Mask, but it's not that, but it might be by that same author. She thought that that was not a worthy thing for a hero to be engaged in, spending his time on the evil, because she thought the evil
was not something big and powerful, but evil was stupid, blind, loutish, out of focus, irrational, disgusting. So you shouldn't surrender your life to punishing evil. So that's a little footnote on it. Your definition of psychological achievement versus external. Well, all are really both, but a predominantly psychological achievement, like learning how to introspect better, getting over a fear of doing auditions if you want to be an actor, is an achievement in regard to your psychology. What's the problem here? It's achievement inside you about your own consciousness relation to your subconscious, or the content and proclivities of your subconscious, if I may use a wrong word, proclivities. Retraining your subconscious is a psychological achievement. External achievement is an achievement regarding the external. You make the sales contract. You get the contract for the sales. You run the marathon in under 5 minutes, whatever it is. It's an achievement, a goal gained that pertains to the external world. So I'm probably not getting your actual question here. What country do you see as the most rational and the one most likely to ride out any coming collapse, i.e. be the least worst off? My default is the United States of America, because the American subconscious is, but we're just talking about subconscious. There's an equivalent for a culture. It's a sense of life, or the ingrained values and beliefs of the majority of the population. They are not, guaranteed to last, and ours are fading fast. But still, I don't know of any other country that has a better sense of life than the U.S. I would say Israel, except for the religious element, which is very strong and very anti-life. So I think the U.S., there are other good countries out there. Hong Kong used to be good before it was surrendered to the communists. What are some other good countries? England is relatively good, but not as good. And you can tell by how far down they've gone. When I used to sell a magazine called the Objectivist Forum, now granted, it was only really consumed in the English-speaking countries. The one that stood out as not in proportion, in greater proportion than its population, so it had a small population, but a large number of subscribers to my journal, was Norway. And I think the attitude of the Norwegians still is rather independent and not quite freedom-loving, but in that direction. So you better not see the world collapse is the answer. And finally, well, wait, there's another $100 one, which is way over the limit, but it's from the same person. So I'll answer both quickly, and we are at our time. What percentage of academics today are advocates of laissez-faire capitalism? Less than 1%. Most of even the libertarians today, who got their start as a spin-off from both sort of a bastardization of objectivism and anarchism from Murray Rothbard, even they don't get it. A lot of them today. And the main thing is that laissez-faire capitalism is not your father's capitalism. Laissez-faire capitalism, as the questioner knows, means a complete separation of state and economics, as Ayn Rand used to like to say, for the same reasons and to the same extent as the separation of state and church. So, for instance, just to give you one little concrete, there are no government printed notes, dollar bills, or anything like that in a laissez-faire society. There's no government involvement with money, no Federal Reserve, no Bureau of Printing and Engraving. And I argue the term dollar would not even be used. Weights of some commodity or some units of some other thing would be used as the means of exchange. Traditionally, it'd be grams of gold or ounces of gold or silver. So you see how far we are from that. And it's the same in everything. There'd be no immigration controls. Now, some people think you could stop people at the border and inspect their health and see if they have a criminal record. I'm against that. I'm against both of those. I think if you did that at the border, you'd have to do it in the middle of town. And you can't subject people to vetting without specific evidence about them. The more generous question is the main issue with empiricists that they look at existence without identity. That's why they never can claim certainty that a ball will fall if you drop it. They don't integrate the fact that both mass and gravity act in accordance with their nature when interacting. I'm thinking. If you mean the main issue with empiricists, no. If you mean the main issue with empiricists' opposition to induction, probably. But the main issue with empiricism has always been a wrong theory of perception. They've always failed to grasp that perception is not conception on the one hand, and is not sensation on the other hand. So when I look there, I'm not seeing a blackness and a roundness and a glassiness. I'm seeing a webcam. When I look at a tomato, to use their example, I don't see a red, bulgy something. I see a tomato. Now, when I look at a stick that's actually bent in water, an optical illusion, stick that's actually straight, in half submerged at an angle in water, so the refraction makes it look like it was bent or broken at the place where the water changes to air, the surface. That's an optical illusion. But there's no illusion of the senses. The camera would photograph the same thing. The so-called optical illusion merely is something that looks like something else. You see it as you see it. The senses don't say, hey, buddy, that's a bent stick, not a straight one. Your senses simply show you the way, in this case, a straight stick looks when it's put in an angle at water. So there's no error or invalidity of the senses. Aristotle saw that. Aristotle was not really up to answering some of the other attacks on the senses, such as what's called the argument for a relativity of perception. But he was damn good, and he did hold the senses were the foundation of all knowledge, which they certainly are. So they have the wrong theory of perception, and that makes it impossible for them to have the right theory of concepts. They don't understand what observing with your senses is, and they don't understand that when you form a concept, you put together things that have the same characteristic, but in different measurements, different measure or degree, as she says. That was Ayn Rand's achievement to solve that problem. So they don't know how abstraction works. And that's the essence of an empiricist. So we got him coming and going. He's got the problem coming and going. He doesn't know what it is to have sense perception, and he doesn't know how you could abstract away from sense perception. So he's in bad trouble. The failure to understand the law of causality is due to those two prior failures. Hume was against, David Hume, the 1700s Scottish philosopher, attacked the law of causality and therefore induction. He didn't call it that, but that's what it was. He attacked it by his theory of concepts. He says, I don't see it. Only concepts of what I see are valid. And what I see is actually not even out there. It's just sensations in me. So how can I get from here now sticky looking thing to anything, or here now heavy feel and solid feel that it's going to drop? That's not how you induce. That's not how you form a concept. So his deeper epistemology is what he used explicitly to attack causality, which you're looking at. You do have to reclaim causality, but it was Hume's theory of perception and conception that he specifically called on to attack causality. I don't see it. I don't have a sensation of it. I don't have a sensation of necessity. Yeah, I have a sensation of this happens and that happens, this happens again and that happens again. But that's just what's happened so far. I don't know what'll happen tomorrow. How would I know that? Oh, I'm like Pavlov's dog. The bell rings, I get fed. I don't know that it has to be that way. There's no necessity. Where's the impression, he said, of necessity, that this has to do that? And the answer is there's no such thing as necessity, except to say it's not due to anyone's volition. It's inherent in identity. So that's way beyond him. He was just a wise guy, Hume. He's kind of fun to read if you want to read something. I know I'm going way over, but just for the entertainment value. If you want to read in the actual history of philosophy, there are easy people to read and there are hard people to read. There are, delectable people to read because of their style and tortuous people to read. Unfortunately, they generally don't line up with value and truth. So Hume, every word he wrote is wrong. And he's almost a pleasure to read. Aristotle, almost everything he wrote is right. And probably because we don't have actual written prose from him, but something that looks like students' notes or his lecture notes, very, very hard to read. Very dense. Ayn Rand is the exception, as people on this call probably know. She's the most exciting author to read in and out of philosophy, whether she's doing philosophy or fiction. And what she says is right and true and obvious once you think about it. So she's the exception. Other decent ones you could read is John Locke. He's not a stylist. He's clumsy in his writing. The sentences go on too long, as those old sentences used to. And my sentences still do. But what he says is often very close to common sense. Plato is somewhat pleasurable to read. He has style. He sets things up as stories. He gives examples. It's in dialogue form. It's not just somebody's lecture notes about Plato. Nietzsche can be very entertaining to read, but he's right in ethics and wrong in metaphysics and epistemology, which means he's really wrong in ethics. Because if your foundation, your fundamental is wrong, what sounds like you're saying, you're not saying. You're saying something wrong. Let's see who else. Descartes. Descartes is wrong, interesting, fun to read. Those are the big ones. William James, entertaining, wrong, unless you're reading his Principles of Psychology, which are very good. William James is the father of pragmatism, which is the scourge of America's existence. So why don't I draw a line there? It's 1:45, and I will thank you for coming and listening, and I will speak next Monday on some fascinating topic that has not occurred to me yet. Until then, goodbye.